So we're going to take a little pause and just talk about the neuroendocrine system here. So we're going to veer away from the brain just a little bit because this system is so important. And we talked about this already a little bit in our intro lecture. Um, Steroid hormones, we mentioned when we were talking about cortisol, are lipophilic because steroids are lipophilic. The word lipophilic means lipofat, philic, loving. What this really means is that they can cross membranes. So they can cross cell walls, which are very fatty. They can cross membranes, which are very fatty. So they're not confined. Their actions aren't confined to one small place in the body. They can really go anywhere in the body and act anywhere in the body where there are receptors. And they do. So these would include pituitary hormones like oxytocin and vasopressin, stress hormones like cortisol and corticosterone, and sex hormones like estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. They can cross lipid membranes and barriers, including the blood-brain barrier. So we kind of mentioned already, cortisol, for example, is synthesized and secreted from the adrenal glands, which sit atop the kidneys bilaterally, but they diffuse into the blood. They can cross the blood-brain barrier and act in the brain as neurotransmitters. Steroid hormones can also cross the gut-brain barrier and act in the gut, or they can be synthesized in the gut or brought into the gut through food that we eat and act on our body. And they can cross cell membranes to act on receptors inside the cell that then usually go to the nucleus and interact with genetic expression. So just kind of highlighting, so the adrenal gland here. The pituitary gland would secrete ACTH, and that would stimulate the adrenals to secrete cortisol. So here's the adrenals. And so we're going to do a little double click on the HPA axis. So you've already seen both of these images, and we've already walked through this a little bit already. But the HPA axis, so in response to stress, the hypothalamus, shown right here, stimulates corticotropin releasing factor, CRF. Here's where the hypothalamus, we're talking about the brain. We can also see CRF, called corticotropin releasing hormone, CRH. CRH is going to stimulate the pituitary gland to secrete adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH. It looks like I maybe forgot to, some of these circles are off. But so the pituitary to secrete ACTH, and ACTH is going to act on the adrenal cortex, so the adrenal glands shown right here, and cause them to stimulate cortisol or corticosterone as a central and peripheral stress response. So the cortisol, corticosterone, it can have impacts in the body as a peripheral stress response, and then it can also cross the blood-brain barrier and have central impacts. And one of those impacts is when cortisol acts on receptors in the hippocampus, that imposes negative feedback onto the HPA axis. So I'm just kind of showing all these different regions here. When cortisol acts on the amygdala, that's going to turn the system on and vamp it up. But when it acts on the hippocampus, that's going to turn the system off, right? So it evokes negative feedback onto the HPA axis. And here's just some other images of the HPA axis. It controls reactions to stress, regulates digestion, the immune system, mood, emotions, and sexuality. So the stress system is really integral to almost every function of the body. It's very highly interconnected with the digestive system, the immune system, and then, of course, because it can impact on the brain, it can really is highly associated with mood, etc. So going back to the pituitary gland, psychedelic impacts in the pituitary, we're going to see changes in pituitary hormone synthesis and secretion. We're going to see central and peripheral tissues downstream of the pituitary become impacted. And that's nearly all central tissues, especially limbic and cortical tissues. We're going to see changes in hormone responses to stress, through impacts of the HPA axis. We're going to see changes in hormone functions, so changes in appetite and sleep. Central tissues, also changes in central tissues that are sensitive to cortisol. So again, this would be limbic brain regions like the amygdala, hippocampus, ventral striatum, nucleus accumbens, and cortex. And then we're going to see changes in emotional intensity and regulatory capacity. So just showing the kind of circular nature here from the pituitary and then just all the way back to the brain.